You're showing the slides. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to IAB Open at IETF 117. My name is Mia Kühlewind.
Hey, I'm Suresh Krishnan.
Okay, let's start right away. We have a full agenda. On the slide on the screen, you already see the note well. It applies also to an IAB meeting because we're part of the IETF meeting week. I hope you know about this. It gives you references to all the policies you should know about. Maybe IPR is less important in this session. Thank you. But I want to point you to the code of conduct. It's really important that we all work together in a friendly and nice way because that gives us the best outcome and makes everybody most comfortable. Next slide. So the previous slide that you didn't show is fine. Also mentioned that you need to log into Meet Echo because we want you on the blue sheet. That's important for our meeting planning, for all kind of purposes, legal purposes, and so on. So we want to have a good, transparent record of what we're doing in these meetings. So please join the Meet Echo. Please use Meet Echo also for joining the queue. And again, be nice. And also note that this is recorded and live streamed. So yes, next. We have somebody in the queue who just disappeared. Okay, next slide. This is the agenda for today. We're in the welcome part, as you might have recognized. We established this kind of practice of asking one of our liaison managers to give a short report about what's happening in their organization, and I believe people like it, so we continue that. This time it will be Martin Thompson about W3C. We have an invited talk, so that will be Nick Farrell, talking about fragmentation and centralization. And then we have a longer time slot to talk about one of the proposed programs from the IAB, new proposed programs on identity management. And we have some time for discussion there. And because we have a 1.5 hour slot this time, we also offered Elliot Lear, the ISE, a slot to talk about one of his recent drafts that he processed. So hopefully we will have time for that. And then if everything goes well, we might even have an open mic at the end, but I don't promise that part. Okay, next slide. Just a very quick reminder, what is IAB Open? So IAB Open is kind of the forum for the IAB to mainly talk about our technical and architectural work, and also a little bit about our liaison work. But what we really want to do with this session is to first give you a little bit of visibility about what we're doing, but then also get feedback from you, from the community about our work. If you're engaging in the session with us here today, that's great. Looking forward for the discussion, but you can also reach us anytime. You can send us an email. You can send us an email individually to all the IB members. You can talk to us during the meeting, of course. And then there's Architecture Discuss, which is a little bit our discussion list. So if you are not aware of that, you might subscribe there. There's also for each of the programs, there's a list. And if you have any questions about liaison coordination, we have this liaison coordination at iab.org. Mailing alias that you can use. Okay, this is the housekeeping part. So quick update about any kind of documents. We published recently 2 documents, and if you have been a follower of IAB Open, you've seen them before. So finally, we published the Maintaining Robust Protocol document, which has been with the IAB for a very long time now. And I think now we got like a good state here. And then a new document, or newest document on application network collaboration using passing lists. So both of them are published. Please read them. I really like them. If you don't like them, let me know. If you like them, let me know. We have the MTEM workshop report, which is ready for publication. The workshop was like a year ago, I guess. So I think this is still a reasonable time, but we should really publish it. And then there's also another workshop report, which will hopefully come out very soon. There's one kind of document in the go. This is still kind of more or less the first version of your document. We didn't have time to do a revision this time, but we're working on it. So the privacy partitioning one is the one that we're still working on. Next. Technical program updates. This is actually there's somebody in the queue.
Yes, Arnaud Tadei, security enthusiast. Three things. 5 minutes for the previous part is really short, surprising, but perhaps that's the normal way, which means that we can't really discuss things. In the equivalent of this slide on the web, there is a point on liaison, which does not appear here. I think there is a real point on discussing liaison because I'm working in the ITU. I made the point in PITG yesterday. In the ITU, we are sending liaisons here. We never get answers. The fact that we never get answers means that it is like from the ITU, or some people in the ITU, a way to say we can continue whatever we want, which is not good. I think we should discuss about that and how we are more proactive to give answers back to ITU. I don't know where this should be this should be discussed here. 5 minutes is not enough. And finally, on the MTN workshop, I just was caught by surprise this morning when I saw Elliot answering on that one. I really have problems with this report. I really have problems with the representativity there. I disagree with a number of things there. There could have been other things that should have been mentioned here, but now it's too late. So I don't know how we process these things, unfortunately, but I don't know how you want to do that in 5 minutes, or we do that offline, or whatever is your way forward, Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Arno. So I think the liaison staff, we do have our office hours, where we can actually talk about it. It's actually in the slide, in the timing. So you can just come by. We can certainly talk about it. There's we cannot do this in 5 minutes, like you said, right? So there's an hour, so you can come by. And for the document itself.
Yeah, also on the ITU issue that you mentioned, this is something that we are discussing actually in the liaison orders between the liaison managers or coordinators and so on. So this is ongoing, but it's not the focus of this meeting. We only have 1.5 hours. But come talk to us. That's always the answer. I think you want to say something about M10, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so really briefly, we will work with you on the M10 report. Obviously, we want to address all community comments, and the representation points are very valid. I plan on fixing that. It probably won't be this week, so expect an answer next week, but we will absolutely have that dialogue with you.
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, thank you for any feedback, but I also want to say, because your higher layer point was that there's not enough time for discussion. So the M10 workshop has been out for community feedback for a while. I think I'm pretty sure I personally told you about the Architecture Discuss mailing list. So if you're not subscribed to this one, please do, because that's where we have all the discussion. And the workshop was a year ago, right? So there were opportunities, and we mentioned it all over again, but we definitely take still your feedback. But please keep also in mind, this is a workshop report. It's not like a generic analysis of the problem space. It's in order to reflect what happened at the workshop.
No, I get it. And I am on the mailing list. I was really surprised why it followed a crack. I don't know why, but anyway, that's pretty my fault. Fair enough, but still, thank you for Wes to address that. And that was my feedback anyway. So we'll go back on the liaison hour, open hour, whatever.
Please come on Thursday, yes. Okay, but we also have some information about liaisons here. We're just in the middle, so let's go to the next slide. So that's the part about program updates. This is just a quick update about the one program that is still running. And this program, the goal is to talk about availability, deployability, and maintainability of protocols and also implementations of the protocols. I already mentioned the document that was published recently, which was discussed in this group. There's also another draft a new draft about greasing. So that's really brand new. It was just published at the draft deadline a few weeks ago. Please read that one. It's in early phase. And there is also a draft about code maintenance. This one will be presented today in Gen Dispatch. If you want to discuss that one, it's also coming out of this group, but it has an applicability to the whole IETF. So hopefully we can move it over to the IETF to process it there. And the EDM program is meeting on Wednesday morning in the IAB office. So if you want to join the EDM program, first of all, join the mailing list, but come to the meeting. It's an open meeting. It's early, but it's an open meeting. Next. And then the exciting news about this session is that we have 2 new proposed programs. We're talking about e-impact first, because that was really just recently proposed. It should be a venue for have discussions about environmental impacts. And I hope we figure out any kind of, or talk about any kind of topics which are not yet in the IETF or IRTF. But also we are looking for things that we can identify that and can go back into the IETF and we can do in this organization. Again, this is also like all technical programs, it's open to everybody. There's a mailing list you can subscribe to, but we're in the process of creating this program. So we didn't fully decide yet, because what we want is your feedback from the community about this program, the scope of the program. So please provide us input. This is the point of time right now. And then the other proposed program is later on the agenda, so that slide is quite empty because you will hear more about it. Do you want to take those? Yeah.
Sure. And I don't know, like just to go for this, right? So there's a lot of updates, like on the liaison front. We got like 25 liaison statements since the last IETF. And so like one of the liaisons, that's a 3GPP. So we had a meeting on Monday, so it went like extremely well. And the RFC that describes the relationship is pretty out of date. So there's going to be some work to update that, bring it up to code. And for the higher bandwidth discussions with the liaisons, so like I think Tommy sent out a mail to the liaison coordinators for all the liaisons, like that we are going to have an office hours. So it's at lunchtime on Thursday. So please do come by. We can certainly discuss and like go through the liaisons and see what requires responses. And I think this is something we discussed at the last office hours, right? So sometimes we get liaisons. It's not clear like which of them require actions on our part. I think that's something we can discuss on the high bandwidth channel for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, since the last meeting, there was no workshop and we didn't announce one. And now we go to Martin Thompson. Where is he? Yes.
Do you want control of you?
There's only 3 of them anyway, so that's me, Martin Thompson. I only have 3 slides. This should be relatively brief. A number of you might already know what the W3C does, but this slide sort of covers briefly the sorts of things that they're doing. It's not exhaustive. They've been around for close to, I think, 30 years working on the web and various technologies that are associated with that. There's some important things to note here. HTML is not really their business at this point. That has been moved to a group called the What Working Group, and there's a number of other documents in that sort of space as well. But they look after HTML, CSS, fonts, SVG, a lot of the things that you would use on the web. All of the DOM interfaces in particular are theirs. There's a whole bunch of work on accessibility, internationalization, security, XML, semantic web, verifiable credentials, the web in cars, the web in things. There's a whole lot of work that goes on there, but it's all loosely around the presentation layer and visible web that you would see today. So if there's any questions on this, whether or not something is W3C or not, you can visit their website and see what sort of things they're working on, or talk to one of the many people who are familiar with what's going on over there to see what's going on there. But this give you a rough idea. Next, please. So the W3C is, unlike the IETF, a membership-funded organization. It is recently formed into an independent nonprofit. I think they followed a lot of the IETF LLC thing with great interest and managed to form a similar sort of organization earlier this year, in fact. And that has moved from a somewhat unusual organizational structure into a more conventional one with an independent board. I think someone requested that I mention that there is no longer a benevolent dictator for life as part of the organizational structure. It is now much more community governance and very much in line with the style of governance that we see here in the IETF. Although work continues on that one. The number of challenges involved in that one. There's a large team there that's involved more actively in the work that goes on there, but otherwise very similar in terms of the style of work. Though I would point out that we treat mailing lists as the primary venue for engagement in working groups. They treat GitHub as the primary venue for interactions, and there's a bit of a style difference there in terms of how they work there. Another notable difference is that while the IETF requires that people disclose the IPR that they're aware of when discussing things, the W3C requires that members make a commitment when they participate in a working group to provide the IPR that they own on a royalty-free basis, and they have a number of policies around that sort of thing. So that's something, an interesting difference, perhaps. Next, please. Right. So there's a number of different interactions with the IETF over recent years. You will notice there's something of a theme that sort of flows throughout all of these things. We see a lot of these features that are built for the web developed in two places. And the primary pattern that we see here is that the W3C will look at the interface, the way in which it integrates with the web browser and the security implications of that side of things, whereas the IETF will spend time on the protocols and the security of the protocols. Some of that is in progress. You'll note Privacy Pass there is an IETF working group. There's no formal working group currently in the W3C, but that is work in progress over there. Other interesting things is that HTTP originally sort of started under the W3C umbrella, but it's now very much an IETF thing and has been for a long time. And I won't say anything about the bottom point. And that's all I have. I think it's probably good if there's questions. If people have questions now, we have a couple of minutes, but come and see me if you have any questions. There's also Mark Nottingham, who is one of the W3C board members here. I'm sure he'd be very happy to help you out, understand all of those things. And there's a number of other people floating around in the audience, like Sam, who's on the W3C team, and a few folks who are active participants in various groups in the W3C I see floating around in the audience here. So I think there's plenty of people around who know what's going on. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, I would like to introduce you to Nick. So Nick is like a invited talker today. So Nick is a research fellow at Berkeley for the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity. So we read this interesting paper by him, about the internet, fragmentation pretty much, and we thought it'll be a really interesting talk to have here. So thank you very much for taking our invite, Nick, and looking forward to your talk. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Let me pull it up. You're doing it?
What did you do?
Oh, nothing. Okay. Okay.
Fantastic. Okay, yeah, my name is Nick Merrill. I'm a research fellow at the UC Berkeley Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, and I'm here to give you kind of 4 years of work in 20 minutes. So by nature, I'm going to have to elude some of these details, and I've tried to do so somewhat strategically, trying to take my best guess at what you already know. This is my first IETF. I'm really happy to be here and happy to kind of, ingratiate myself into this community a little bit. So this is about fragmentation and centralization on the internet. And by way of introduction, I got interested in this work in about 2019. And I was doing my postdoc, and my postdoctoral advisor, Stephen Weber, came to me and said, what's going on with internet fragmentation? Everyone's talking about internet fragmentation. What is it? Is it real? What it has happening specifically and mechanically? And what is the direction and velocity of this trend over time, if it is indeed real? And at that time, there were these headlines like, the splinternet is already here. The splinternet is growing. And the World Economic Forum, I think that the apex of this was the WEF's Internet Fragmentation and Overview. And in all of these, there was this kind of vague and data-free sense of internet fragmentation that begged the question still, what is it? There's a lot of implicit understanding, but explicitly, what is internet fragmentation? So here's my own frame. The intuitive picture behind internet fragmentation, as it was understood by policymakers, not the IETF, as it was understood by the non-technical community at that time, is that a supposedly global internet is becoming increasingly different in different countries. National borders were the kind of the area of interest. And of course, there are consequences here for freedom of speech, investment, technological development, political relations, which we'll talk a little bit about more later. But this is what people were thinking of when they talked about internet fragmentation at that time. So how do we measure it? Well, I did some work basically taking proxy measures at different layers of the internet stack. And I decided to elude this, the details on this for this audience today. You can find that at this link, and I think that these slides are available somewhere, so you would have access to them and follow up if you want to learn more about the methodology here. But what I found was surprising to policymakers and will probably not surprise this audience. Oh, I see. This is an older version of the slide. That's fine. What I found is that the internet is multipolar. And that the simple story the policymakers told about a free internet versus the closed internet, free countries, countries with a free internet versus countries with a closed internet, was overly simplified. And to take a very simple and tightly scoped example, think about the transition between IPv4 and IPv6. So, there is some degree of internet fragmentation. Some, IPv6 penetration is uneven throughout the world. That matters a great deal to people who design switchboards. It matters a great deal to people who design routers. That's not necessarily what policymakers were talking or thinking about, right? Of course, those things are important. They come off of someone's balance sheet somewhere, and there are types of policies we could think about that can move the needle on this. But that wasn't really what policymakers were talking about. They had different questions that were ultimately about different kind of political things.
Nick,
yeah.
Can you step just a couple of centimeters away from the mic for the remote people?
Oh, absolutely. Too loud?
A little bit closer. Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah. That's perfect. Yeah, thanks.
So what were we talking about? So we looked instead to talk about content blocking, because we felt that the discussion that policymakers were having was ultimately a discussion about politics. And we felt that content blocking was the thing we could measure technically that would reveal something political. So what we did was take this ICLab data set, which you can kind of follow through. This is an old version of the slides. That's okay, though. I'll circulate or find a way to circulate a newer version. So we took this ICLab data set that we used to see what was blocked in different countries where there was evidence of some kind of tampering or dropping packets along the wire, and related that to host names. And we took those host names and ran it through this this commonly available data set that categorizes those websites by the kind of content they have. And this data set actually was used by corporate firewalls for kind of blocking, restricting access to gambling websites or pornography websites or other kinds of things like that. And we use that to categorize basically who's blocking what kinds of content. So you can see a little sample of the data set here. What you can see is that different countries are interested in blocking different things. South Korea blocks a tremendous amount of pornography. Most of what South Korea blocks is pornography. And on the other hand, a lot of the content that you see blocked in Turkey is categorized as news and media in that data set. So our hypothesis here is, we're not taking a normative kind of view of what should or shouldn't be blocked or whether things should or shouldn't be blocked. What we tried to do instead was take a descriptive view of which countries blocked similar types of content. Which countries blocked content that was in a similar vein, that was categorized similarly to others. So we created this map, and again, if you follow through to this paper, you can even see an interactive version of this map. You can explore it, see a force diagram and all other kinds of neat things. And what we find, first of all, is that there's a tight cluster here. Most countries really don't block much, and they're broadly similar to one another. And some countries are outliers. Venezuela blocks, kind of idiosyncratic content, basically things that are about the regime there. And then there are other countries that actually have surprising similarities. China and Hong Kong. You can see Hong Kong plays this position between China and kind of this main bloc, which is kind of provocative observation in its own right. But what really kind of tickled our interest about this was that when we correlated these similarities to other facets that are of interest to political scientists, like military alliances and trade agreements, what we found is that if you're in a military alliance with someone, you probably block similar content. If you're in a trade agreement with someone, you probably block similar content. You're more likely to be in a trade agreement with someone that you block similar content to than you are with someone who you don't. And what we concluded from this basically is that these relationships reflect and likely go on to shape maybe a two-way direction of causation, these geopolitical relationships. Now, there's one big caveat to that observation, which is that not everyone's say in internet governance is necessarily equal. Right? So one way of thinking about this, what happens when you visit a web page? And this is a wonderful diagram that comes from David Clark's piece, Control Point Analysis, kind of a 2012 paper. And don't worry about this. Okay, don't try to interpret this diagram. The point is, it's very complicated. There are a lot of different things that happen when you try to visit a web page. But one thing we can do, and this is building off of David Clark's analysis, is boil this down to a few key control points. These are things that you cannot route around. And in fact, we did this work in conjunction with the Internet Society for the Pulse Internet Pulse dashboard, which I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with. We contributed kind of this data and the framework for the centralization part of the Internet Pulse dashboard. So in order to do that, we identified these key control points, certificate authorities, who does web hosting, who does proxy services. You can think of that as content distribution networks, so people like Cloudflare, DNS servers, DIN, Cloudflare also, data centers, top-level domains, all of that. And for each of these, we did kind of a mix of data collection and manual coding processes to see whose jurisdiction is where. And what jumped out at us right away is that the jurisdiction for the companies that run a lot of these services is the United States. And in fact, we can create this kind of diagram, the proportion of each of these control points who's provided by US-based corporations. So we look at the market share, let's say, of CDNs. We say, okay, of that, of the Cloudflare, right? You have 70% of the market. Your jurisdiction is the United States. And we sum up the market shares of all of those providers who are based in the United States to create the summary statistic, which is the proportion for each control point whose jurisdiction is the United States. So you can see here there are quite a number where the overwhelming majority, in fact, in some sense, even the totality, is based in the United States. So let's talk about a few. Top-level domains. I think we all know about top-level domains here. Quite a lot of these top-level domains are administered by registry backends or registrars who are in the US. And this is, has been relevant to US interests before. Who here is, out of curiosity, who here is familiar with the operation in our sites? Okay, very few people. Okay, great. Well, here's a very interesting tidbit for you. In the new version of the slide, we'll have a reference to some work on this. Immigration Customs and Enforcement, ICE, has been running since 2006 this program called Operation in Our Sites. What they do is basically when someone is running afoul of intellectual property, let's say, or something else, then ICE can go and seize from the domain registrar, the domain registry backend, that website. So this has been used for, clear web drug marketplaces. This has been used for people selling counterfeit seatbelts, very wide variety of things that this has been enforced against. What's fascinating about it is, first, it exploits the fact that registry backends are based in the US and uses this kind of seizure process to take advantage of this. And second, this whole process happens without due process. So this is actually, forfeiture, civil forfeiture without due process. And in some cases, ICE has done the civil forfeiture process on US citizens, which isn't, if you're not from the US, that's not supposed to happen. But the conditions of recourse, and, if you know anything about ICE, conditions of recourse are not always so clear. Oh dear, something has happened.
Okay, let me try. My internet is working. So, okay, let me.
All right, we'll just do the next slide thing.
I'm going. I'm gonna. Easy. So let's do 23.
Is the clicker around?
No, but I need to pair. Just say next. Probably easier.
Okay.
22 was done.
Okay, next slide, please. So proxy services. So you may be familiar with content distribution networks, Cloudflare, Akamai, things like that, Amazon CloudFront. You can see that the overwhelming majority, almost all CDNs are run by US companies by market share. The CDNs, I'm not saying every CDN in the world, but the CDNs that people use, 97.6% are based in the United States. Next slide, please. So if you've ever tried to use Tor, which I imagine many people in this room have, you know that it's a huge pain to use in practice because you're constantly getting captured. And the reason you're constantly getting captured is that these CDNs have decided that it's simply not worth their time to allow Tor traffic in. Tor traffic tends to be malicious. It's broadly implicated in DDoS attacks. Makes it hard for them to do the kind of DDoS mitigation that their customers pay them for. So they just block it. Now, this has kind of some interesting consequences that we could discuss later. If you know Tor, you probably know that it was largely funded by the U.S. Department of Defense for kind of international interests of the United States. So there's this interesting kind of conflicting sets of interests here between the Department of Defense and private corporations in the U.S. who aren't necessarily cooperating fully. But that's a topic for another time. Next slide, please. We did instead, actually, and this is some forthcoming work in Duke Law Review, which again, the newer version of the slides, you'll have a reference to that. In the Duke Law Review, previous slide, please. In this Duke Law Review piece we have coming up, we kind of make this argument that's, basically an antitrust or monopoly argument. What we show, and you can see from this diagram, is that content distribution networks are not only overall domiciled in the United States, there are a few players who really dominate the market, and almost all of the market is dominated by the top three. And this graph, I would say, you can look at it a few ways. Cloudflare has a huge market share in part because the long tail of internet companies use Cloudflare. But don't count out Fastly and CloudFront and Akamai. Akamai in particular is a favorite of really, really big content providers like HBO Max or whatever. They'll tend to use Akamai. But the point remains, no matter how you slice it, there are a very small handful of companies that absolutely control this market. So that's a concern, at least for antitrust in the US. And the fact that this is overwhelmingly a kind of a US-based story tells you a lot about kind of where the control of the internet is. And remember, again, content distribution networks sit between user queries and server responses. If the CDN doesn't want to show you something, the user's not going to get it. And there's some interesting research recently about how dominant CDNs really are with respect to end users' experience of the internet. Something like 76% of all user requests to CDNs can be delivered to those users without traversing the tier 1 ISPs at all. A lot of these CDNs have totally cut the traditional kind of tier 1 public core of the internet out of the picture. And that, again, is, becomes relevant for the kind of competition story, because policymakers tend to think of the tier 1 ISPs as competitive. There is an efficient market for bandwidth. I'm sure many people here have heard how efficient the market for transit is from people like Bill Woodcock. Now, it's true that that market is for transit is efficient among tier 1 ISPs. The important caveat is that tier 1 ISPs are not relevant from the perspective of CDNs. Next slide, please. So the finding there, then, is that US organizations effectively control the global internet through their control over these key control points. And my takeaway from this, what I surmise, is that what we observe as internet fragmentation is not a response to a global internet so much as a response to a US-controlled internet. It is that fundamental US control that drives a lot of the fragmentation behavior we observe. And although I didn't get a chance to get into it, it is unclear fundamentally what we mean by fragmentation. Some people consider, EU GDPR to be kind of fragmenting because it produces different versions of websites in different countries, which is in some sense an affront to a global internet. And while that is the case, I think that the differing opinions of Europeans, the legitimacy in their minds of sovereignty, shows in some sense, proves out this thesis in some sense. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. We'll ignore this for now. Okay, so well, this is an old slide. You can ignore what's on the screen. Maybe previous slide. Give people something to look at. So I'll share with you kind of where my mind is on these questions now. I hope to get feedback from you about these questions and kind of what you think about them. So my observation is that regardless of what we might decide internet fragmentation is and decide how we might consider the problem of centralization, personally I consider centralization to be a really big problem because it centralizes points of control. The CDNs in particular might be very appealing targets for sophisticated APT attacks, which could be very, very destructive indeed, depending on the nature of those attacks. Whatever we might do to mitigate those problems requires us to really understand both the politics and the economics of the market for these core internet services. We understand, I think, far too little about what the market looks like for things like DNS servers and things like content distribution networks. How does this market fit together? And what are the incentives that people in this market deal with, and what drives behaviors of market participants? This isn't the only question we could ask, but it's something that we surely need to know if we want to make any progress on this. And to illustrate this point, I've been working a little bit with Scott Schenker at UC Berkeley, who has some really interesting proposals around what he calls the interedge. Basically, these composable extensions, he used to be called the extensible internet, extensions to kind of TCP/IP that provide a lot of the services that CDNs provide, things like DDoS mitigation and caching, things like that can be provided by these decentralized nodes. Now, if we want these sorts of things to catch on, we'll have to understand, first of all, who's the customer who's going to use these, and second, who's the provider and what are those providers' incentives? Trying to understand these market dynamics will help us understand how we might stand to get uptake around these things and what we can do from a policy perspective to make those more appealing. Second, another specific question that's been on my mind recently is what exactly is the nature of the relationship between telecom providers and content distribution networks? So a puzzling example, and something that's been puzzling me lately, and if anyone here has any insights, please tell me, is that AT&T, a telecom, in fact, my telecom, owns HBO, another service I enjoy to use. And my collaborator, Tejas Nirchania at Berkeley Law, asked me one day, hey, what CDN does HBO use? Because I see AT&T has a CDN. Who here knew that AT&T had a CDN? Okay, a few people. I did not know that AT&T had a CDN, and I published a law review piece about CDNs. This was news to me, right? So I thought, well, surely their HBO Max is going to use AT&T's CDN. And certainly that would make sense. It's vertically integrated IP, platform content delivery. And I'm an AT&T customer. If they're going to deliver, because anyone's going to use that CDN, it's me. So I opened up, Chrome and did a little digging. And where were these packets come from? Akamai. So I did a little Googling, and Akamai and AT&T have a relationship with each other. What is the nature of the relationship between Akamai and AT&T? Why is it that AT&T would bother having a CDN only to go and use Akamai for their content delivery? Is the CDN no good? Are they not good at competing with Akamai? Are they white labeling their own transit to Akamai, and that's why it looks like Akamai? Is Akamai white labeling their service to AT&T so that AT&T can use their kind of retail relationships with small to medium enterprises? What's going on? The fact that I can't answer this question shows us how little we know about how this market fits together. And if we don't understand how this market fits together, I'm very pessimistic about our ability to do anything to enhance this kind of problem of centralization, and let alone to do anything about the fragmentation that results from it. So that's the end of my 20 minutes, and I hope we still have some time for questions. If anyone has any, I'd love to hear them.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Elliot, I think you were in line first. We kind of kicked you off, so if you want to go ahead, go ahead.
Thank you very much. You're going so you can see me. It's a great presentation, Nick, and not surprising, your advisor, Stephen Weber, actually appeared at an IAB workshop called ITAT, in which we talked about bundling economics, which was really enjoyable. Just one or two points. I think we have to be really careful about definitions in terms of what we mean by control points. CDNs are really difficult to characterize in that regard, because on one hand, anybody can start a CDN. All it requires is money. If Elon Musk wanted to break out another $40 billion, he could have the best CDN in the world, probably, assuming he could hire anybody. But it's not, and in fact, the proof point for that is Cloudflare's own existence. That they weren't there. They came into the market. They delivered a good service, and the same is true with Fastly. And that is actually a technical relation, which is no particular CDN is required for the internet to function. It's just, the only issue is whether there becomes a lock-in function based on the APIs that are used. So it's a great area for exploration. Thank you.
Yeah, great comment. Thank you. Yeah, listen, that's a really interesting point. I tend to agree. And that makes it even, I agree with you about that point. And by the way, I'm sorry I have nowhere to look. You're like the booming voice of God here in this room.
Yeah, it was on the screen, but not fully.
So look, I think that while I agree that proposition that anyone can come along and make a CDN with enough capital makes it even more puzzling to me that AT&T and other telecoms, Comcast, have CDNs, yet nobody seems to use them. Why in my data can I not see anyone using these AT&T or Comcast CDNs? If it's so easy to make, and telecoms already have the infrastructure that delivers the last mile hop to my home, why is nobody using this CDN infrastructure? Why is it that these big CDNs still have this market dominance in that context? That's a puzzle I haven't yet figured out.
Thank you. Mallory, go ahead.
Hi, Mallory Nodal, Center for Democracy and Technology. So yeah, I really appreciate your slide. I don't think it had a number on it, but where it really aligned with my realization in listening to a lot of conversation about fragmentation over the last year or so, when it's become very, very popular to talk about. Most of the time when people are talking about it, they don't mean what we think they mean. They mean things are getting complicated. It's just it's a statement about complexity. And that resonated when you were talking about how the internet used to be, or is, and is still very US centric, but that's changing. So it feels like fragmentation, but maybe what it is there's just a plurality of approaches to content and other things like that, for better or worse, right? So that was just my comment. But then I'd add a question to you or to others. This comes actually from the Gaia session earlier today. There was a really interesting presentation on not just companies that are dominating the US, but even when you have supposedly a global network for your content distribution, all of the traffic is still going through the US. So they're talking about like the fact that there are very few IXPs on the continent of Africa, for example, and if you're in one country and the content you're requesting is in the same country, it's still highly likely that your traffic is going all the way around the world and back again. And we couldn't, in the Gaia conversation, nobody really had a good answer as to why, because it seems more efficient. There are all these kinds of incentives that we would think would exist to keep content local when possible, irrespective of whether or not there's a mandate for content localization, which is something that's a trend as well. And so coming up with actual incentives and trying to solve that problem might solve a lot of other problems too. So I just wanted to bring that forward here and wonder if you had thoughts on it, because I think it's related.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on that. So I have two dueling observations. First, obviously, there's a tremendous strategic advantage to having all the traffic route through your country. Okay, this shouldn't need to be said, but yes, there are a tremendous number of metadata attacks and other things and reasons why you might want traffic to route through you. Now, here's another interesting observation. Let's say that there exists some country that doesn't have any kind of boomerang routing whatsoever. And in fact, such country exists. China has very little boomerang routing. If you send a packet domestically from China to China, it will route only through China and it will not go internationally at all. And the reason is that China only has 3 ASs that connect it to the rest of the internet. It's called the Great Bottleneck of China. analogy to the Great Fire. So there's some great work on kind of how that's architected and how those ASs work and why they work. But one really interesting thing is that it creates this asymmetry in when it comes to attacking internet infrastructure. So it's often assumed or presumed that no one would ever dare attack something like a DNS server or a content distribution network, because doing so would be too much, that would cause too much blowback for the attacker. You know, if you were to go and attack something, you would suffer the consequences to such a great degree, it wouldn't be worth the attack. But the absence of any boomerang routing actually makes that calculus look a lot different. There is absolutely no incentive to go in against, leveraging some kind of attack against a CDN if you don't rely on that CDN and if that outage in that CDN wouldn't affect you. Those kinds of asymmetries are actually very powerful. And we should absolutely be cognizant of them when we think about what it means for the internet to be stable globally. Stable internet means some kind of balance between boomerang routing perhaps and not. There's some notion of sovereignty that needs to be balanced against interdependence. And this is actually mimicked in debates about trade throughout the 20th century. There was this kind of thesis of globalization that interdependence would prevent conflict because that interlinkage exactly would disincent anyone from attacking anyone else. It would be too destructive. And as we do think about the very real need for sovereignty, I think that it's equally important that we balance that need for sovereignty against a realistic need for interdependence and the role that interdependence plays in hopefully decreasing conflict and disincenting conflict.
Thank you. Arno, go ahead.
Right, so Arno Talley, Broadcom. So in fact, you just made the segue. So first of all, thank you. It was very insightful and very good presentation. But this is a good segue you finished on sovereignty, because in fact, what we see is a lot of concerns on fragmentation coming from, let's say, regulation and hyper-regionalization. So how regulations, including the EU, is under the name of what it called strategic autonomy, how they are actually weaponizing a number of assets that are going to really have a problem at the end. So, for example, take DORA, for example, the new what is it called, the Digital Operational Resiliency Act, that is really about cloud providers in the FSI sector. So my question here is, it's a little bit underrepresented into your presentation, but maybe have you done some work and research on that part, how this is influencing the potential fragmentation?
Sure, sorry. What is have I done work on what exactly?
So have you considered regulation work,
regulation.
like DORA and whatever the EU is doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I haven't really looked specifically at the role of regulation, in part because it's hard to measure causal relationships between regulations and the effects on the internet. That doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means I haven't figured out a way to do it. I think that it's a critical question, and especially with Gaia, assuming you're talking about the EU Gaia project. You know, it's something I'm really fascinated by.
So no, it was not the Gaia project, because I don't think this one is going anywhere. I think it was the other one, which is the DORA, D-O-R-A. Another, so how the EU is weaponizing its instruments to, let's say, precisely to fight US in certain ways. So it goes down to even weaponizing its auditing capabilities to the FSI, so that they are less incentivized to go for US companies on what they do.
Right, yeah. So, you know, there's this theory in political science called hegemonic stability theory, and really it should probably be called something more like hegemonic openness theory. But the idea is that in global trade, in I think it was the late 18th century into the 20th century, you know, Britain and then followed by the US, was this hegemon that basically ran world trade. And into the 21st century with the financial system, more or less this is true of the US, and in the internet, I'd argue, the internet also acts sort of as this hegemon. And the puzzle behind this theory is like, okay, there's this hegemon, so why do we see the system be as open as it is? Why is it that a hegemon can dominate the system and yet, there's still this open and free trade? Why is it that a hegemon can dominate this internet and yet there's still this open and somewhat global flow of data? And this theory that has a pretty satisfying explanation for this phenomenon, which is basically that as long as a hegemon exists, it actually benefits the hegemon to have a very open system, because in that situation, everyone else can kind of, do whatever they want, and the hegemon, whoever they are, gets to benefit from their central position and extract some rent basically from that central position. Also influence some soft power, weaponized interdependence, as Abe Newman would say, and all of those other things. Now, what happens when the hegemon declines? Well, it turns out that when the hegemon declines, there tends to be a very, very uncomfortable, chaotic period. And until a new hegemon emerges, in which case openness happens again. So what I ask myself is kind of what happens if these sorts of regulations, these sorts of incentives end up being successful? What if they end up really challenging the hegemon in a real and lasting way, such that, in this case, the US no longer is the hegemon over the internet? What does the internet look like? Well, hegemonic stability theory would say it wouldn't necessarily be a very open internet. That may be counter to some of our expectations. That may be counter to some of our probably ideological preferences, but this is the prediction of that theory. And, if we observe something else, it would be a serious challenge to that theory, which is more or less, proved out, at least in trade and finance. So what are we to make of this? Well, my overall kind of theory is that the internet is both something countries fight on and over. Meaning it's something that a country is used to struggle against one another. It's a mechanism for international kind of competition, cooperation, but it's also something that nations struggle to control. It's a domain of conflict as well as a mechanism for conflict and competition. So, as this plays out, we'll kind of see if there is a way of challenging this hegemon, and if there is a way of challenging the hegemon, does that decrease the openness or stability of the internet? And if so, then we have to have a very frank and serious political discussion about what's to be done about these things, or how to kind of preserve some standard of service in that situation.
Thank you very much. Really frightening and inspiring.
Thank you.
And we need to move on a little bit quicker. We have a few more people in the queue.
Yeah, I think Andrew, you're next. Go ahead. I think the queue is hopelessly reordered, but I think we have a memory. So.
Thank you, Andrew Campling, 419 Consulting. Really interesting presentation. I'm sure you only scratched the surface of 4 years, but you put out some really fun points. Two questions really. Did you consider, or have you considered, as we're in the IETF, how maybe standards are used to reinforce control points? Because I can certainly think of some standards being developed here which arguably strengthen the role of CDNs, to randomly pick on one, as you just talked about CDNs. So it'd be useful to get your view on that. And also, have you considered whether SDOs as a whole is another control point?
Whether standards are a control point?
Whether standards bodies are control points that are exploited by certain big organizations to exert control.
Yeah, what a great question. I haven't looked into that. I haven't thought about it. They probably are. I would love to look into it. There was so much outside of IETF kerfuffle about new IP and kind of standards, whatever, ITU. Yeah, I would love to look into that. I really wonder what the answer to that question is. I wonder how to think about that. Yeah, if you're interested, please reach out. I'd love to talk about that idea more.
Thanks, Nick. Rich, you're up next.
Rich Sauls, I guess I work at the 4th largest CDN. I'm your HBO providers. I'm just curious, though, how you determine that various telcos don't use their CDNs.
How I determine that various telcos...
You said, for example, AT&T, who no longer owns HBO, has a CDN, but HBO, when they owned it, wasn't delivered over the HBO. I mean, you know how it was delivered via Akamai, but how you made also the claim that lots of organizations have CDNs and aren't using them.
I see. So in the example of HBO, when I go to HBO and I request content, I can look at the packet headers and get,
Yeah, you can even just do a DNS lookup and it'll have Akamai in it. Yeah, no, but you made a general statement. I just wondered if you if that was just a view or you had some statistics. It's probably too detailed to get into here. I'd love to talk with you offline.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it. I guess at a high level, I think this is the answer to the question you're asking. We have this data set from W3Techs that has, we partnered with them. You know, they're a partner also of Internet Society. A lot of pulse metrics come from them, and we work with them to get this corpus of CDN usage. And, you know, we kind of looked at the CDN usage to determine kind of the popularity of these CDNs. And what we found was that, you know, AT&T and Comcast wasn't in that data set, which forced us to ask, you know, why? And there are a couple explanations we could come up with, but there's no resolution on that question yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Mark, you're up next. Thank you.
Hi, Mark Nottingham. I've spent about 25 years working for the top 3 reputable CDNs in your list. I'll let you interpret that. And also deploying them in private companies, including Yahoo and Merrill Lynch. I'm also a law student. I'm also, and I serve as an expert to the CMA in the UK, although I can't represent them, of course. So I have thoughts. Probably too many for the mic line. But are you looking at this from a you know, centralization standpoint of just generally what's good for the internet? Or you mentioned you were also looking at it from a competition standpoint, which is a very different thing. What's your angle here?
What's my angle here? You know, my concern ultimately is about catastrophic pan-internet outages.
Okay.
I'm fundamentally concerned with that scenario.
Okay. That's actually really helpful context. Okay. Yeah. I would love to chat you more because I do have some thoughts, especially, I guess, from the competition law standpoint.
Great.
And I think there was a question about standards bodies of point of control, just as an aside. That's also a very interesting question to me. I tend to think of it more in terms of what is the role of technical standards in internet governance, which is kind of a bigger question.
Thank you, Mark. Samita, the queue was closed, but did you want to make a brief thing? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nick.
Okay,
this
thank
was
you
like
very
an
much.
Awesome presentation, and like thanks for coming, and thank you. Thanks. Chris, you're it. Do you want control, Chris? Did you want control?
Yeah.
You can hand it over here.
Yeah, he has to come up. Yeah. Yep. You got it?
I think so. Yeah. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris, representing the IAB, talking about a new proposed program we call HUDIS, Holistic Human-Oriented Discussions on Identity Systems. As you may have seen on the email that went out to the architecture discuss list, I guess the primary motivation for this is to try to get our heads around the very, very large and vast ecosystem that involves things like authentication technology, credential technology, identities, where a credential is like a specific type of technology that binds like an identity to a particular user in this case, and then an identity is whatever, like that could be anything, an email address, a phone number, what I don't know, an account name. There's all sorts of different types of identities. That's part of the problem here. That the way these two things, I guess, overlap, and I guess the scope and size of the ecosystem is just kind of big and complicated, like the slide that we just saw earlier in the last presentation. For some of these things, we know how they work and function, and some of the technologies are like have a ton of energy and momentum in the industry and the standardization space. Like things in W3C with WebAuthn are very well understood. Passkeys in practice, like they're taking WebAuthn and actually getting them more widely deployed, is great. So the intent is not to kind of like take energy out of those particular groups and communities and put it elsewhere. Instead, is try to get our head around I guess the overlap between all these different like technologies as they're used in practice. So and probably to also seek some clarity on how some credential and credential mechanisms and types of identities are used or misused in practice. So some of the goals, proposed goals, because everything's up for proposal here, is to kind of just go out and look about what the landscape looks like for this particular type of technology, and have discussions with the experts that are in this community as well as outside the community who may be developing these particular technologies, bring them into the room and try to make sense and develop a clear mental model for how this stuff works. It would also be useful in developing that mental model to get a more clear understanding of how these are used. And I've also, in parentheses, noted how they are misused. So the canonical example that I like to go to here is people misusing IP addresses as a type of identity for a user. That's like a practice that does exist, and we should try to get away from that, and understanding why that's the case and what is the gap that exists that put us in that situation in the first place would be something that might be discussed in this particular program. If there are gaps that like clearly emerge that are well defined that can be filled by technical work, to dispatch that to the appropriate places in the IETF such that we can develop technical solutions and get them out into the world. So concretely, some possible outputs may be to like document some of these use cases, to put them down in writing, or in a document like an RFC. Doesn't have to be an RFC, just a single piece of literature that someone could look at. A GitHub page would also be perfectly fine, in my opinion. Perhaps in documenting these use cases, we could also talk about what are some common patterns that emerge for using this type of technology, and what are some anti-patterns that emerge in practice, or anti-patterns that people bring to the table in these discussions. Because this is a pretty huge and vast and complex space, we'd like to ideally have people come in from outside of the community, like I said, and we would like to facilitate sort of collaborations with these groups, maybe even in the form of IAB workshops where we solicit papers or position papers on this topic, and have people come to the same room and discuss. And again, as I was saying, as a possible goal, identify places where we can actually do things concretely in the IETF. So I think the questions that we're interested in with respect to the actual proposal are mostly around scope, because this is, I keep saying this is super huge and complex. So I'm sure everyone understands that by now, but there are reasonable ways you could refine this down to something that's a bit more manageable. So for example, you could imagine just restricting this to discussions on credential systems and just punting everything that has to do with identity. Don't even talk about it, just focus on what are the different types of credential mechanisms that are used, and how do they interact in practice, and are there any like obvious gaps that exist. Just this morning, for example, I was sitting in the OAuth working group and listening to some presentation on like some credential mechanism that has like selective disclosure. I'm like, gee, I sure heard about selective disclosure in other contexts like privacy paths and other contexts in the W3C. There's just a lot of overlap happening, and we'd like to have a place for these different groups to come and discuss things. Another question that was raised on the list was, what is the scope of an identity, if we're to consider that? Does it pertain to only humans, as the title suggests, or does it extend to like machines and devices, and like identities and credentialing systems that are used to get to devices that are not representative of humans to talk to one another to do things like do some computation or exchange some workload or whatever. So we'd be interested to hear thoughts on that if people have them. And yeah, so that was it. There's not really much to this other than like we'd like to hear feedback and see what people think. Is this a good idea, a bad idea? What should the scope be? I'll take any questions you may have.
Thanks, Chris. And you did send out a call for comments on the architecture discussion.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, and there's a GitHub repository that has the draft text there. It could use some wordsmithing based on the feedback we've already received on the list. So we do intend to do that. We just need to get around to doing it. But yeah, I guess we'll start with Justin. Thank you.
Hi, Justin Richer. So I think that this is a fantastic set of questions to be asking here at the IETF. The scope is definitely a hard one, because if you ask 10 identity professionals what identity is, you'll get at least 17 answers. And like you need to, this work is going to have to embrace that, because identity means a lot of things that are contextual. And it's often that context that people actually care about, and identity is usually, or I would say at least many times, a tool that people are using to solve something in a particular context. Identity is the thing that most fits the type of, you know, a small part of the problem that they're actually after. That said, I do think that because of that, it makes sense to have, you know, sort of a wider effort in the IETF to look at identity systems. I do think that there is space and discussion and probably desire for machine identity and stuff like that. I'm not sure if it actually belongs in the same spot. And, you know, I don't know, because people and computers are in fact different. I know it's kind of a weird thought for most of the folks in this room. Yeah, I see you shaking your head. Regardless, it is an important set of questions. It is a wide set of questions, and there's a lot of people that we can hopefully pull in to have this conversation to figure out which parts of this the IETF ultimately really needs to care about. So thank you for bringing this up, and I hope to see more on this.
Great, thanks, Justin.
Thank you, Justin.
Yeah. Brent Zundell. I chair the Verifiable Credentials Working Group at W3C, the Decentralized Identifiers Working Group at W3C. I edited and wrote the presentation exchange protocols at the Decentralized Identity Foundation, where I sit on the steering committee. This is a very interesting set of questions. I do want to warn slightly that anytime you're talking about the big I identity, the conversation will inevitably become very fraught and lead to almost immediate stoppage of any possible technical progress. And so trying to determine what technical progress can and ought to be made should be an almost entirely separate conversation from the big I, what is identity, who should have one, is it a machine, is it a human, is it generative, is it whatever. All of that to say, happy to participate. And would have liked to have known about this beyond just having 7 people say, have you heard about what this IAB thing is? So just whatever that means. Anyway.
Great, yeah, apologies, it was not, you know, advertised in the I guess the venues that you participate in. We probably should have sent it to the Verifiable Credentials group. That makes a lot of sense. On the, you know, tackling what the big I identity question is, I don't think the intent is to try to define like what is and or is not, and what are the circumstances that a person should or should not get an identity. I mean, we'll certainly, it's hard to avoid like talking about identity in this particular space, but I don't think we're trying to like establish, you know, a canonical definition of what, you know, capital I identity is. That, yeah, as you suggest, that seems like a pretty good way to not make any forward progress. And I think trying to limit our scope to things that are a bit more manageable will help us make forward progress, hopefully, in an already pretty wide, diverse space. So yeah, thank you for the suggestion. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Dick Hart. Like a number of other people here, I've been involved in identity for a long time, you know, a couple decades. I've participated in many workshops that have lasted over days or weeks, trying to get people just all to understand on what is identity. You know, the OpenID Foundation exists because I came and ran 3 BOFs at IETF, and you know, we decided to take our toys and go somewhere else because we couldn't get anything started here. There's identity work all over the place, and a fair amount, you know, an awful lot of that here. It's unclear what you're wanting to do with this that doesn't turn into like a multi-week workshop on just trying to understand a whole bunch of different parts of identity. Like, what is a credential? You're not going to get agreement on that. What's identity? You're not going to get agreement on that. That just seems, you might have an idea of it. I think you've seen sort of the tip of the iceberg, and the iceberg looks, you know, this thing you see is big and complicated. right? But you're only seeing 10% of everything that's going on.
For sure. I'm willing to acknowledge that our understanding of the situation may be very different from those who have been immersed in the space for a very long period of time. I'm confident, or I'm hopeful rather, that like we have the technical chops of like trying to dig into like widely used credential mechanisms and try to make sense of them. Perhaps we'll not be so successful, but you know, I guess time will tell if this program proceeds.
So I'm just trying to understand. Are you, like you say, there's a lot of work and there's probably also a lot of problems. And we definitely don't try to solve them all, but we're trying to figure out if there's anything we can do in this community to help the problems. Or are you saying we shouldn't even try?
A lot of people are solving other problems. I think just trying to get a layout of what's happening identity is a massive work effort, right? Before you can even figure out where are there problems to solve. But
Okay.
for the people that are in the industry, right, we're all working on a lot of the problems, right? It's not like there aren't people thinking about identity, right? There's, you know, thousands of people have been working on identity for a long time. And just the scope of trying to understand the lay of the land, that just seems hard to do in what is identity and credentials, right? That first part seems tough.
To give sort of perhaps like or did you want to reply to that?
No,
to give a kind of concrete example. So I mentioned the OAuth example earlier. There are a number of like very, very similar technologies like Privacy Pass, OAuth, verifiable credentials. All of these are kind of doing very similar things, and the circumstances in which you would use them, how they're used, perhaps why they're misused, or like we want to present sort of like a clear picture for like the relationship between these types of things, or that's one of the goals at least, proposed goals.
I mean, this is why I have concerns. You just listed 3 things that to my mind are very different and you think they overlap with each other.
They definitely overlap.
OAuth overlaps with.
But are you, like, I think we need to have this discussion in the program, or are you
Okay.
saying you don't even want to have that discussion? Let's take it off.
Yeah,
Let's go through the queue for now.
Yeah, I'm not even sure how to. It just comes across a little naive. Like this is way more complicated than what you're phrasing, and almost all of your descriptions are kind of come across. I'm glad you're at the OAuth meeting, right? But GNAP kind of overlaps with OAuth.
Sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just want to
yeah.
say, I feel like we need to have this discussion, and if the end of the discussion is we can't do anything here, we're closing the program, we're done.
Yeah, I just worry about the having a discussion on this is probably there's an awful lot of work in trying to have a discussion that's actually going to conclude.
Okay, thanks, Dick.
Peter Castleman. I'm working on standards mostly in the OAuth area, and so very excited to see this. I think this is great. In terms of the questions around scope, I think if we think about this program as a kind of integration point to bring different communities together to exchange ideas, I think that's actually really helpful. Because otherwise, I find myself sort of traveling from working group to figure out what is it that you're doing and how does that fit with what I'm doing and is there an opportunity? So I think as an integration point and a kind of a clearinghouse for those conversations, that's really, really good. I think you might want to think about defining, whether it's credential or identity system. Think about maybe framing it in terms of the outcome that you want with identity systems, right? So with an identity system, often the goal is something along the lines of making sure that the right person has access to the right thing at the right time. And that actually then opens up the conversation about all the technology building blocks that you need. To Brent's earlier comment about the big I, that might be yet another, right? If you can focus on the technology pieces, that's helpful, but also then, it just helps us structure the conversation because to Dick's point, it's a big, big topic, right? And then on the second one, my perspective there, identity goes well beyond humans from my perspective, at least. We're seeing so much challenges around managing devices, workloads, and this configuration, right? What you mentioned, we're using an IP address, which is an identifier for a device on a network for a human. Well, maybe some of that's because maybe we don't have proper human identity systems, but maybe we also don't have proper systems for machine identity, and so we end up sort of merging these things inappropriately. So I prefer a broader scope because again, it allows us to at least connect these silos and have these conversations in one place.
Yeah, I mean, I think as on one of the earlier slides, like bringing people together either in the form of a workshop or in the program itself to have these discussions is like one of the goals that was like primarily identified. And we didn't explicitly list, sort of the use cases that we would want to target and or to help use to frame these discussions, because we were hoping that the contributors who do come and facilitate or contribute to these discussions would kind of bring the use cases that are important to them. Authentication being like perhaps the most obvious one. But yeah, I think using it as like the integration point for all these different communities is a perfectly reasonable way to think about this.
Yeah, and then just opening beyond human identity would help that conversation a ton.
Sure, and it would be a shame if there was like effectively forks of like people thinking about the same topic just with different I guess like this is the human group, this is the machine identity group or whatever. But we have to be cognizant of like trying to make like meaningful forward progress and like have productive conversations. So I perhaps with some right balance we can increase the scope, but there is the risk of like just slowing things down by just trying to do all the things.
Sure, all depends on the outcome you want.
Of course. Martin.
Yeah, Martin Thompson. When I suggested that we limit this to talking about humans on the list, I think a number of people jumped down my throat. I understand that this is an IEB program that you're proposing here, and there's always the possibility that we can really sort of get into the weeds and have a very broad scope on anything. So I think that's certainly something that a program could consider as within bounds for discussion. Even if the stated charter or the goals for that program were somewhat narrower. And my sort of goal here is to ensure that when we talk about these things, we have something more of a focus on, for instance, the effect that the systems that we're talking about have on people as opposed to the machines. So back to Peter's example of the IP address, using that as a proxy for an identifier for a person, that's a really great example of something that I think we should be talking about. But I don't care about the IP address as a proxy for identifying a server or something, a piece of machinery, because I think that broadening the scope in that particular way would be just a, well, I mean, we already heard. It's an ocean that we're looking to boil with a magnifying glass as it is. I would rather not get too far into the other things. I'm also surprised that no one has mentioned the identity layer of the internet yet, and I wanted to be the first. I think that's not necessary, but I just wanted to be the first. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. The name, despite being kind of cute, I guess, for the program, has human-oriented, particularly because that was like the primary focus. But that said, like I'm personally not opposed to expanding the scope, but I think you make some good arguments as to where we should place our focus to start. Kelly, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kalia. My handle's Identity Woman, and I have convened the Internet Identity Workshop since 2005, twice a year. So it is a forum in which you and folks looking at this are welcome to come and share and get input and feedback on. And I'll just name, building on Dick's point, about 3 years ago, I did work for a client to identify all identity standards in SDOs and other industry associations that I could related to human-centric identity, and I identified 1,500 of them. Okay, so when he's saying the scope of what you're trying to do, just the sense-making part is significant.
No, sure. Yeah.
So I'll just leave it at
no
that.
disagreement there. I anticipate like there's going to be a 1,500 was a bit higher of a number than I was expecting. Just like that one. But the actual ones that are used in practice, like we're going to have to try to keep things small to start and just focus on some pretty important ones. But perhaps like a total, complete, exhaustive picture of the landscape may not be a goal that we can accomplish in this type of program. And I don't know if it's worth our time, but wow, today I learned. Great.
Go ahead, Joe. Joe Salloway. I tend to agree that scoping this work is going to be really important. I also think we can't completely, I think Martin's point was good in that we're going to maybe focusing on machines is not the right thing to do, but there's going to have to be some aspect of that because more and more there's just a lot of work in that area. And so we won't be able to separate it completely. But that's my thinking.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
Hi, Heather Flanagan. So I'm also one of the many people that have worked in the identity space for a while, and I'm actually the coordinator of one of the groups you mentioned in the proposed program charter. And I'm like, and I still didn't hear about this. Wait a minute. I think it would be more useful for the IAB to say, I mean, you use we kept saying we, and I kept wondering who we was. If you're going after a program that's actually scoped to what can we, the IAB, do, or what can we as the IETF do in this space, I think that's interesting. I think there are enough other identity-focused standards organizations that are looking at scale that I know you said you didn't want to take the energy from the room, but you're going to find it's all the same people. So coming at it with a bit more focus to what can you accomplish here would be very helpful.
Agreed. That seems to be like a pretty unanimous comment that we're getting. So that seems like perfectly good feedback to fold into the proposed charter.
Yeah, I mean, also an IAB program is not like a working group, right? We are trying to identify what the work is we can be doing, and like the reason why we're creating a program is because we on the IAB are not all identity experts. We need to have the discussion with the identity experts, which are not members of the IAB, and so that's why we're proposing a program. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Like if you can take it off with Chris, that'll be awesome. The queue was closed, so thank you. Elliot, floor is yours.
Well, hello again. I'm speaking to you this time as the independent submissions editor. There's a new RFC out I'd like to talk about and mention a couple of other things relating to the Snowden revelations. All right, so before 2013, the world was a very different place. We actually accepted a certain amount of vulnerabilities as a culture. Can you back up, please? Thank you. The graph on the right is from the Gordon Loeb model, and enterprises could use that to figure out how much to invest. It's a pretty fundamental component in the economics of information security. It basically says that your optimal investment point is your expected loss over E. So about 37% of what you think your expected loss is, and people would basically run with some notion of that if they had a notion of their expected loss, and we assume that some observations would take place and that they'd be limited by locality. There was some positive network management benefit to observation in terms of understanding network performance and quality of service, and even some security benefits as well in terms of looking for various forms of attacks. It was still subject. A lot of this was still subject to abuse. Obviously, we saw some service providers and some behaviors we didn't like in the IETF, and there were grumblings about that. And in fact, I would say Speedy sort of had its beginnings through those grumblings. Next slide, please. What we found was an attacker that had near infinite resources in the form of in the NSA, and we couldn't really quantify losses. One of the reasons we couldn't quantify losses was because, well, how do you quantify something that the NSA has gotten in terms of, their visibility? Enterprises just didn't know how. Next slide, please. So this is us in 2013. How many, just for show of hands in the room, how many people were there in the room for that? Good number. I'd have to say we were pretty pissed. We were stunned at just the scope of the effort put in by the NSA, and it led to action. It led to Bruce Schneier showing up and really sort of giving a startling talk. And it led to the pervasive surveillance as considered an attack, RFC, I think it's 7258. And it led to a lot more encryption on the internet. Next slide, please. So RFC 9446 reflects on a lot of things. It reflects, first of all, on how it was at the time. So Bruce talks a little bit in this about what it was like to report the story. And he almost describes what you come away thinking he has PTSD a little bit when you read his really well-written essay. But it's something worth reading because there was a human cost to reporting the story in the first place. Stephen Farrell talks about our response more technically as well as maybe a little bit culturally. Then Farzana Badi talks about the human rights implications, or in some cases, where we made advances and where we haven't gone as far as perhaps she would have liked. And why? And then Steve Bellevin puts this all in a historical perspective. You almost get the feeling of, all of this has happened before and all of this will happen again. But I want to highlight that we have raised the bar. So next slide, please. So why is this document important, right? Retrospectives are awfully boring and not worth doing unless we learn something. So when I searched for authors for this document, I asked them to answer a few questions, right? Did we react well? Are there things we could do better if we have these sorts of events in the future? What accomplishments did we achieve? What is left to be done by us or by others, right? And then how has the threat environment evolved since then? So for instance, a good example of that will come up in just a moment. Now, a hint to you as a community, the independent submissions editor always asks the question, by the way, why is this document important? If you come to me with a document and you can't answer that question, you're going back empty-handed. Next slide, please. Okay, so a couple of key points. First of all, nothing happened overnight other than outrage when we were in the room. It took a lot of time, a lot of commitment, a lot of effort, a lot of consensus, and a lot of code to get things done in terms of change. It was a sea change within the community, but it took time for that sea change to take effect. The second point I want to make is that it was helped, I think, also that there was opportunity seen in terms of certain players saw that there was opportunity to benefit from improved security, and they took advantage of that. So we caught a tailwind off of that as a community. But a key point here I'll say is that a lot of the data that we're concerned about is still accessible. A lot of it's maybe accessible to in concentrated form, in fact. And so even in the short term, if an attacker knows where to attack, they may get more information than the NSA got. A good example might be if they're able to attack one or two social networks, right? Or Amazon. So infrastructure attacks, the other point I want to make is infrastructure attacks are serious. The threat environment has changed. Perhaps this has only grown with IoT. Of course, I'm an IoT person, so I'd have to say that. These are things to think about. Next slide, please. This last one's a little bit of an advertisement, right? This was an important document, I think, to do, and I'd like the community to consider it, even talk about it. I wish I could be there to talk with you about it in terms of how we performed, what we could do better, what we did well, right? And that threat model is something we should always stay focused on. And what's the next biggest problem? And we've talked about centralization and fragmentation today. Just a hint, you'll be seeing a little bit of work coming out along the lines of centralizations real soon now. My priorities that I've taken on are those three things, and I view them expansively. If you submit something as for an independent submission, of course, it won't be a standard and it won't have community consensus, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's uninteresting. It might be very interesting, and I think you'll find this document is. And that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Elliot.
And thanks to the authors, by the way.
1 minute
of
for
which I'm
questions.
not.
Well, 1 minute for open mic. No, I think you had enough. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for the session, everybody who was on the stage contributing, but also provided feedback to us. See you next time.
Hey, no, thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks.
Interface.